Hello, everyone. Good morning, the Americas. Good afternoon, Africa and Europe. And good evening, Asia, Pacific and Australia. I think we have people from all over the world today. Thank you very much for joining us for IGF's new COVID-19 series webinar. My name is Isabelle Ramdou. I am a senior associate with the Intergovernmental Forum on Mining, Minerals and Metals for Sustainable Development, IGF for short. I currently lead our work on local content policies and co-lead together with my colleague Aaron Cosby, who is on the call, our work on the future of mining. I'll be your host for this webinar for the next 75 minutes or so. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted online within the next 48 hours or so, both on IGF's website and on IISD's YouTube channel. You will all receive an email in the next 48 hours with the links to the recordings of the webinar, to the PowerPoint, and then to any document that will be mentioned during the discussion. This webinar is in English only. We hope that our next one, which will be on local content and downstream beneficiations, will have simultaneous translations for our Francophone and Spanish-speaking audience. Just to mention about the question and answers later, please use the Q&A function at the bottom right end of your screen to ask any questions throughout the webinar. Just put them through as the conversation goes on. We will collect them and then speakers will answer them at the end. We may not have time to respond to all the questions, but we'll try to do our best in the time that we have. But you can also contact us directly after the webinar if there is any follow-up questions. So let me briefly introduce the program of the webinar. As some of you may know, since a few weeks now, IGF has been running a number of initiatives relating to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the mining sector. We ran a few webinars already, notably on tax policies and responses. Those were in English, French, and Spanish. And we also had a month ago another webinar on the impact of COVID-19 on local procurement and global supply chains. We will be running a few more in the next few weeks into the summer, notably one on force majeure and COVID-19, and another one on new technologies and the future of the mine in a post-COVID era. So stay tuned for those webinars. And then for your information, we have also produced a couple of policy briefs, guidance documents, briefing notes, notably one on force majeure and a few on tax policies and responses. On the topic of the day, a briefing paper was released on Monday looking at the implications of the pandemic on employment in the mining sector. I will not present the whole paper because it's available online, but I'll just highlight a couple of issues just to frame the discussion in the next minute. So all those papers are available online and you will get them through the emails, thank you note that we will send to you after the webinar. The purpose of our discussion today is to look at the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on employment in large-scale mining. We will talk about the impacts felt, but in particular on what responses governments and industries have provided in the short term to prevent employees from being stranded and stripped of financial resources. We will then look at the longer term implications and on what the future outlook for employment and skills development could look like, considering the need to secure health and safety of employees on one hand and jobs on the other hand. To discuss these issues, we have the honor of welcoming three high-level speakers today, whom I want to thank for kindly accepting to share their views with us. So from Brazil, we have the privilege of having Dr. Gabriel Mota Maldonado, Director of the Department of Sustainable Development in Mining at the Ministry of Mines and Geology. We also have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Nikki Black, Director of Social and Economic Development Program at the International Council of Minerals and Metals, ICMM. Nikki is responsible for providing strategic and operational leadership to ICMM's work in this area, including the skills of for the common future, community relations, and security and human rights, etc. Last but not least, to provide us with a strategic global perspective on the future outlook, we have the pleasure of hosting Mrs. Alette van Leur, the Director of Sectoral Policies Department from the International Labour Organization, ILO. Alette is in charge of the department which works on the promotion of decent work in global supply chains, as well as on the future of work in specific sectors. So just to frame the conversation, let me start by making a couple of short remarks. As we have all noticed, the COVID-19 pandemic is possibly the most disruptive global event witnessed since the 1929 Great Depression. It has grown from what was initially thought to be a health pandemic to become an unprecedented social and economic global crisis, unleashing multiple shocks in its wake. One of them is the havoc caused to the labor market. It is currently estimated that up to 305 million full-time workers in all economic sectors are at risk of losing their jobs in the second quarter of 2020. And this number is growing by the day. Job losses are affecting both developed and developing countries, but may have longer lasting effects on lower income countries due to their limited capacity to provide financial cushion to protect workers and industries. The mining sector, like every other sector, has been severely impacted on several fronts. In terms of jobs, the sector has a specificity that needs to be highlighted though. The large-scale mining sector is often considered a capital-intensive sector with an average contribution of about 1 to 2% of direct employment. So one may think that compared to other more labor-intensive sectors, impact may be limited in the mining sector, but we need to be reminded of a few important facts. First, the large-scale mining sector plays a critical role, economic and social role in remote areas. Activities are localized in underdeveloped regions, and therefore the sector is the key, if not the sole provider of jobs in the absence of other alternative economic activities in those remote regions. So the sector has impact in those specific locations, which is much more significant compared to the national figures. Secondly, mining activities have significant multiplier effects through supply chains and also through satellite activities that depend on the sector, and therefore creates a lot of indirect and induced jobs, which can contribute up to 15% of national income in many countries. Third, tight working conditions on mine sites have placed workers in the front line in terms of health and safety risks, prompting the mining industry to put in place very strict protocol to prevent virus spread among its workers and the communities when national lockdown regulations did not force them to do that. So many mine sites have closed temporarily to manage that. So what happened to workers? Like in other sectors, many employees are being laid off. In some cases, large mining companies who had the financial capacity to do so have committed to continue to pay the salaries and social contribution of employees that are on their payrolls, but that has not always been the case. In a number of countries, employees have been furloughed, that is, they were sent home without any pay. Some categories of workers, such as contractual workers, non-permanent staff, migrant workers, have been the biggest losers, and they often find themselves completely out of work and pay without any certainty that they will be back to work. And that's just for the direct jobs. Like I was mentioning, there are also a lot of indirect job and induced jobs that come out of the mining sector. For example, mining supply chains have slowed or production have halted entirely due to business closures, meaning many indirect jobs have suffered. The pandemic has exposed, therefore, the weak points of the labor market in the mining sector, pointing particularly to unsustainable working conditions and lack of job security for many precarious, casual, and informal workers. This heat map there just highlights a few of those issues. I just wanted to mention maybe 2 or 3 before letting the real experts speak. I think it's important to highlight the complexity of the labor requirements across skills categories along the entire project life cycle of the mine. And that's what this heat map is showing us. maybe 2 or 3 things to mention here. One is that labor requirements are not the same across the mining investment cycle. Some phases are more labor intensive than others, and therefore impacts vary depending on the maturity of investment projects. All skill sets have been impacted. Lower skilled workers may be more impacted than others because their tasks might be difficult to digitize, but all others have also been impacted. Technical workers are very vulnerable. Higher skilled workers are not entirely shielded. We've seen, for example, fly-in, fly-out or driving, drive-out workers were not able to reach mine sites due to restrictions of movement of people, and often those were high-skilled workers. Demand for labor, of course, is highly context specific. Underground mines and open cast mines have different demands, type of ores extracted, the degree of mechanization or automation of mines also affect the demand for labor, and therefore the implications have been different. And then last but not least, the breadth and the depth of supply chains have determined the impact on overall employment in the mining sector. Just to cut that short, the deeper the linkages, the higher the impact on induced and indirect jobs. So what have been the responses from governments and industries? Let me now invite our speakers to chip in here. We will start with how governments have responded to the situation of workers in the mining sector, and then move to the industry, and then have a broader strategic consideration from a global perspective. Gabrielle, let me start with you, if you agree. Brazil is the top producer of key minerals such as bauxite, tin, lithium, and major supplier of many others, such as iron ore, just to name but a few. Last year, the sector has contributed to a production value of about $34 billion US, and the sector employs about 200,000 people directly. The COVID pandemic is no doubt having serious consequences on the sector, both in terms of output and workers. And your government has declared state of public disaster since March, a situation that allows the government to provide exceptional fiscal and non-fiscal measures to the mining sector, which is considered as an essential sector. Can you share with us what were the immediate response measures that the government has taken to support direct jobs and salaries in the mining sector? And can you also tell us whether similar measures were available to the suppliers?
Okay, Isabel, good morning. Good morning to everyone. And thank you for inviting us. It's a privilege to speak to you, to the IGF, and to sit here at this digital table with outstanding professionals, which I will probably call colleagues for the next hour. And I would like to thank you for the invitation on behalf of the Brazilian government and on behalf of the Brazilian mining sector. And for me personally, it's really special to be here. I'm a former labor lawyer in the world of work, especially the pursuit of good working conditions has always been one major concern of my endeavor, both as a private lawyer and now as a public servant. But let's move to the topic, and I'm going to be quick. I'm skipping the numbers, as you might have already had contact with the data that shows how big and important the mining sector is for Brazilian economy and social dynamics. So as we know, the COVID-19 pandemic is an unprecedented challenge that compelled the government to take some measures concerning the mining sector and other economy sectors. Before anything, it's noteworthy that Brazil is a federation, so cities and states have legal and political autonomy to address particular situations in accordance with the peculiarities of the sanitary conditions they are facing. We also have a good number of entities and public institutions, such as labor's prosecutors' offices or Ministério Público do Trabalho, that play an important role in the state's responses and measures to some specific cases. Thus, a good number of initiatives is under the competencies and jurisdictions of different players. So thinking about the consequences of the coronavirus outbreak, we had to ensure that the mining activities and therefore the materials provided by it wouldn't be put on hold due to the sanitary situation. At the same time, we had to guarantee that the workers are as safe as possible. So at the federal level, the Decree 10202 establishes that mining activities, including processing and related supply of goods and services, are essentials, and due to such a status, cannot be interrupted as long as the companies abide the sanitary conditions. And meanwhile, the federal government, through the Secretariat of Geology and Mining of the Ministries of Mines and Energy, which I'm representing right now, issue a best practice guide on mining, specific for the situation of the COVID-19 pandemic, listing health and safety measures that the companies and suppliers must take. We also established a direct communication channel by which companies and any person or organization affected by mining activities can manifest their concerns and file any suggestion or demand. And alongside with the direct initiatives mentioned, there are some general support programs that encompasses tax relief measures and credit lines with subsidized interest for the financing of payroll obligations, especially for small and medium companies. And of course, with the condition that the benefited companies do not fire employees. And another measures related to the suspension of the possibility of suspension of the labor contracts or reduction in working hours in place of contract terminations, and with a substantial help provided by the government. And it is worth noting as well that the most vulnerable miners or workers in the mining industry, the small scale miners that we call here garimpeiros, are entitled to receive an emergency monthly grant during this difficult time. So as they are expressed cited in the law that created the grant as particularly vulnerable self-employed workers. And the same law paid attention to the special situation of women at this difficult time and allowed them to double the grant. So that being said, this mechanism allows us to overcome minor problems and to ensure that mining, including supplier, is not suffering massive layoffs or income cuts. So although in terms of salaries and employment, we seem to be in a relatively good situation here, it's important to point out that we are aware that we have to build a framework that provides employees and their communities, of course, with a genuine view of safety and job longevity. So for that, it is impossible. We have a very strong belief. We strongly believe that sustainable development as a principle and as an ultimate policy guide can enhance the importance of mining within society, paving the way for more integrated and responsible activity, and then warranting a good future perspective for companies, workers, and communities. So generally, this is a summary of what the government is doing to support the industry and the workers right now. And thanks for the question, Isabel.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. I'll come back to you in a minute with a follow-up question. But let me turn to Nikki Black from ICMM. Like in every other industry, ICMM members are also facing multiple challenges, starting with the urgency to stop disease spread among workers and the communities. And like governments, companies have provided immediate responses, including to limit job losses and prevent loss of income. Those were, of course, context specific, given the health situation and government policies in place. Can I ask you whether in the context of the economic recovery, you see some trends and practices coming from the industry to anticipate such future risks with people?
Isabel, thank you very much for the invitation to participate, and I'm delighted to be here today with those of you calling in from around the world to share and engage on this critical topic. For those of you who don't know us, ICMM is an international organization which brings together 27 mining companies and around 38 national and commodity associations to work collaboratively to strengthen mining's contribution to sustainable development. Now, over the last 3 months, we've been supporting our members as they respond to COVID-19 through convening our members to share information, guidance, accelerate learning. And this rapid exchange of information and knowledge has been guided by 2 priorities. Firstly, protecting the health and safety of employees and communities. And secondly, laying the groundwork now for the longer term recovery of the workforce and the communities and economies in which our members operate. Now, I know your question is framed around the recovery, but I'd like to focus first on the actions members have taken in response to the crisis, because it's there we really see the seeds being sown for what comes next. So members have taken a number of actions to respond to the crisis, with tailored and focused strategies and tactics being adopted in accordance with public advice and the local situation. But nevertheless, we've seen several common approaches emerge as members work hard to keep their employees, contractors, and suppliers safe. So some examples, our members are introducing or have introduced strategies and tactics or measures to protect employees that include mandating working from home where it's physically possible, instigating different rotas, putting restriction on work-related travel, your point around FIFO, critical, quarantine protocols for returning travellers, restrictions on non-essential visits to operating sites, social distancing measures, and the identification and protection of high-risk individuals. Now, other measures include temperature screening at site, implementing increased hygiene measures, and in many cases providing a 24/7 hotline for employees to seek medical advice. And we're all aware increasingly of the mental health challenges for workers as they are working in very different contexts, the heightened levels of anxiety caused by the crisis and increased isolation of many workers. Now, it's important to note here as well the care that's been taken with regard to Indigenous peoples, particularly in our members' responses, given that those workers and those communities often have higher risk factors and comorbidities for COVID-19, and considerations were put in place particularly around isolated communities with very limited health provision. So what do we see changing now as our members certainly the industry at a global level starts to shift from the emergency response, whilst recognizing that some mining jurisdictions are still very much in the throes of the peak of the initial wave of the pandemic. But it's fair to say that globally we are now starting to see a shift in the focus in the industry, the conversations we are having, but also what we are hearing from government to recovery. A number of our members have reopened operations in jurisdictions which have come out of lockdown, others such as in Brazil, as we've just heard from Gabrielle, some of our members such as Vale have been operating throughout. So they're now grappling with how the world of work in mining is different with COVID-19. And it may be too early to say that trends are beginning to emerge, but there are certainly a few consistent themes I am hearing and seeing that respond to the need to protect workers from the risk of infection, reinfection, and changed ways of working. So what are these themes? The first is that the trends that we're seeing, the themes we are seeing, they're not necessarily new. The ways in which the mining industry was being disrupted before COVID-19 remain the same, but many of those trends are likely accelerated in a post-COVID world. So examples that we track at ICMM, trends that impact the industry, include market volatility, technology disruption. These are not new, through to increased transparency and accountability and more active stewardship of the supply chain. So we expect continued disruption on areas such as ESG, automation and digitization. We think these will strengthen a mining company's ability to build resilience to future pandemics and will help to aid its recovery in a post-COVID world. Second, I would expect to see some new and in some instances permanent changes to the ways of working, even post-pandemic. So these flow from actions to ensure the ongoing protection of workers and their host communities. For example, testing and screening measures at airports and mine site entrances, through to social distancing measures on site. So these have, adjusted site rosters have resulted not only in increased flexibility for people, but also productivity. And I think we are going to see some of those changes sticking. But we're also getting insights in some really surprising efficiencies being gained from people working remotely, recognizing the mental health challenges and some of the productivity hits. Employees in roles that were deemed non-essential were taken off-site by many of our members and continue to work from home. And while it's perhaps unsurprising that the majority of people in office-based or corporate roles have been able to continue to work from home, it was surprising that some even quite highly operational roles can be done off-site. So we're starting to see this, I'm hearing this sort of second theme around the ways in which changes to the ways of working in response to the crisis may be maintained into the future. This thirdly accelerates the move as well towards automation and digitization. Now, this is seen as one of the critical ways in which the mining industry can build its resilience to future pandemics and better manage the business continuity risks that come with any crisis event in the future. But it also plays an important role in supporting the transition to a green economy through reducing carbon emissions. And I'll come back to some of the challenges and some of the things that we will need to work through collectively as industry, as government partners, as workers, around automation and digitization to really harness the potential benefits that it can bring. But certainly a focus on de-densifying the workplace through more automation, through virtual ways of working, is very much a theme that is coming through. And finally, I'd say there's a real new emphasis on the strength of and the importance of the strength of mining company and community relations. So you're seeing this with members saying, it's only because of the strength and the mutual respect of our relationships with community members that we've been able to understand vulnerability and design and deliver an emergency response quickly with the support and meeting the needs of the community. And that has helped us take steps which help enhance the resilience of the community in the longer term. So practical examples of this are members advancing grants for local supply chains to not only extend the sort of furlough schemes they have for their own workers, but supporting that in their local supply chain. And we're also seeing a real opportunity come through around working into the local community and working with health institutions around PPE and training for the use of that and safe work practices. So in summary, the four themes we're seeing, perhaps they are trends. It's not that these are new themes or trends, they're just faster and they're happening sooner. We expect to see changes in the ways of working for both health and safety, but also efficiency reasons. We expect there to be the acceleration of digitization and automation, and community relations is in the spotlight and will continue to be in the spotlight in order to, and focused on how to support local economic resilience and catalyze sustainable working and sustainable economic activity in the recovery for local communities. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you very much, Nikki. You made a nice transition to the next part of the conversation that we want to have on the resilience May I maybe ask also people who are on the line to put the questions. There is a chat box. If you can start sending your questions, so then I can send them to the speakers while we're having the conversation now. Yeah, so let me just turn to the second part of that conversation. Gabrielle, you talked about relief, and Nikki, you also talked about relief measures, but also about the recovery questions. Maybe now, I mean, it would be interesting to hear about, how does that pandemic is changing the way that both the industry and the governments are looking at the resilience of the labor force looking forward. Gabrielle, is there what are the long-term government policies in that sense to strengthen the resilience, or to maintain the resilience of the labor market? There are different issues that we've heard from Nikki. I mean, questions will certainly come. How do you reconcile the need to provide a scope for safer mines through digitization, etc., but also make sure that you maintain livelihoods? So how is your government looking at the future, learning from the challenges that the current pandemic has brought?
So, Isabel, we are hearing a lot about kind of a new normal era, and we've had to think about future outlook. We have to envisage a scenario during an unimaginable crisis, so it's quite a challenge. At the same time, some of the most commented measures that could be taken to build a more resilient future will probably come with overwhelmingly complex externalities. For example, we're probably going to see an acceleration in the pace of automation in common mining tasks, which aims at lowering and managing risks, but can also extinguish jobs. And the same measure, automation, is likely to be welcomed by big companies' capex budget, but it's hard to think that it would be feasible for medium or small-sized miners. And once it is always good advice to diversify the number of players in the market, the government would need to act on the market to compensate a natural disparity, especially if we bear in mind that in Brazil, more than 90% of the mining companies are medium or small sized. And nevertheless, some key factors indicate the path we have to follow. I agree that the pandemic has pulled the blanket off and highlighted what we need to do. And first of all, mining exploration, notably its benefits, need to be tangible for everyone. And this means that it needs to act within society in a manner that shows mining as a stakeholder of a general effort to build a better future. And recent surveys on how the mining sector reputation works in Brazil demonstrate exactly that. Brazil's mining sector has an ambitious guide issued by the government in 2011 called National Mining Plan 2030, which is clear to diagnose a very serious problem concerning that issue. Some of the major mining sites are, in fact, economic enclaves, and the communities surrounding it have a low perspective aside the ones provided by the mining company and by the mining activity. To ensure that mining will become a decisive social player in a countrywide interest is to prepare enclaves to become autonomous communities, and so successful cities that are worth living and working in. The same national mining plan also states that mining sector needs to improve transparency and to stimulate social participation. So this includes federal, state, and city governments, and of course, companies and communities. That people need to be sure that a great amount of our mineral wealth is being used to supply the community with good public services, and I could not stress this enough, with respect to the environment and to the rights and safety of the mine workers. So the newly created National Mining Agency is working exactly right now to improve its monitoring and enforcement capacity of safety and health regulations, and we see it as a step towards a more reliable and more sustainable mining sector. And in fact, this kind of initiative is part of an integrated approach of the mining sector, which tells us that every policy regarding mining exploration should be both interdisciplinary and locally focused, especially in an immense country like Brazil, with so many regional traits. We must prepare the municipality and the local population to express and claim for better policies. So it requires improving the educational system and the social safety nets as tools for economic emancipation and effective participation. It also requires, bearing in mind our situation here, we have a lot of small-scale miners. It requires creating technical training programs that support small-scale miners, and of course, a state council that congregates a plethora of organizations from technological to social areas to provide the mining sector an integrated and interdisciplinary platform for policy decision making. And all of this is being designed by the government right now. So to sum up, the future outlook for the Brazilian mining sector is certainly challenging, but promising as well. We envisage a future of sustainability, or as I would prefer to say, the age of sustainable development in mining, in which minerals play an important role in the pursuit of a cleaner and healthier life, and even more important role in the process of constructing of a flourishing society. Thanks, Isabel.
Thank you very much. Nikki, may I ask you a second question? So the pandemic has further reinforced the need, as you were mentioning earlier, to reinforce more innovative and bold solutions to improve the contribution of mining to host communities and ground the social license to operate. What can be done differently to strengthen the resilience of the mining workforce?
Thank you, Isabel. This is a very challenging question to answer, but one that we are thinking deeply about at ICMM and with partners, including the International Labour Organization and yourselves at the IGF. And I'd just like to thank you for producing the paper that you shared the highlights of earlier. It's a really significant contribution to our thinking about the longer term impacts of COVID to help inform the industry's response. Certainly our members who represent about 30% of large-scale global mining production. So I'd suggest three things as a starting point, and I'm really keen to hear reflections and questions from the attendees on the call. The first thing I think that can be done differently to strengthen the resilience of the mining workforce is really to see the opportunities in automation and digitization, but to take steps to harness its potential for the benefit of workers, communities, and companies. So already we know that automation provides significant improvements to health and safety risk. However, the introduction of new technology can reduce the numbers of roles available at site, and it can change the skills required. And rightly, questions are being asked and concerns raised around how new technology will impact jobs in all industries, but especially in mining. As you highlighted, Isabel, the dependency in particular areas, and Gabrielle described them as economic enclaves. So for the mining sector, These questions are particularly urgent because automation and digitization could reduce the opportunities available to local community members and impact a company's social license to operate. But if the transition is managed with the local community's interests front and center, then the shift to automation can be a positive one. There are already some positive examples and lessons learned from the likes of BHP and Rio Tinto in the Pilbara in Australia. And even in more challenging environments such as Africa, where the social challenges of moving towards automation are significant in some contexts due to non-mechanized methods that employ thousands of people at some operations. So 2 of our current programs at ICMM that have become even more relevant in the post-COVID world speak directly into this, this question around automation and digitization and how we can harness its potential for greater benefit and sustainability improvements. So the first is a program we have called Innovation for Cleaner, Safer Vehicles. It's a unique supply chain collaboration between the world's leading mining equipment manufacturers and mining companies to accelerate technology development in surface and underground mining equipment. And it's focused on improving performance outcomes across safety, health, and environment. So it's, in many ways, it's supporting the innovation of cleaner, safer vehicles that are tend to be more automated, but have a different fuel mix and carbon footprint as a result. But secondly, we have a program of work that I lead around skills for the future. And here we've been working with our members and with many other external stakeholders, convening social practitioners, sustainability executives, and the 27 CEOs over the last 2 years to try and identify what is required to equitably and sustainably build skills that will be needed in the future to support a just transition to a low carbon economy and minimize the impacts to host community as we move towards the mine of the future. So skills training, reskilling workers to make the most of new technology and ways of working, and supporting the skills acquisition for community members, local enterprises, to take advantage of the benefits new technology and ways of working can bring will be key. And through this program, Skills for Our Common Future, we're looking to engage and support a large-scale skills program. But underpinning it is the need for an open dialogue to really understand the challenges it poses, the anxieties it raises, and to ensure that the benefits can be harnessed for everyone. The second point I'd highlight, which is linked to this, is that we need to think about how to broaden the base of workers to make mining truly inclusive and diverse. So one thing that remains the same in the world, whether it's before or post-COVID, is that inclusion matters. And we know that when you have more inclusive, diverse teams, you have significant performance outcomes, businesses are more resilient, communities are more resilient, countries are more resilient. So we're not only talking about improved female participation here, which will not ever truly accelerate to the level that we'd like it to without some form of disruption. We're talking about broader inclusion. But it may be that the perfect disruption opportunity has just arrived and there is a significant post-COVID recovery opportunity here. Now, the third point that I would raise is that, so just before I go on, I'd just like to note that, you know, this won't just happen. And there's another real pull for more diverse and inclusive mining, a more diverse and inclusive mining sector. And that is positioning mining through its unique position to leverage a growing platform to promote how critical minerals are in society, particularly low carbon economy minerals, to bring mining to the attention of younger generations who would see mining as a career path. We have a challenge in the industry as well around an aging workforce. So the opportunity here is to both broaden and deepen the workforce to make it more resilient. And finally, the third point I'd raise is there's a real opportunity here and a need for the consistent adoption of responsible mining approaches. We heard from Gabrielle what government can do to catalyse the adoption of more responsible mining approaches so mining can support the realisation of sustainable development. But even before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, all industries, but mining in particular, were experiencing an increased focus on environment, social, and governance issues, mostly driven by demand for increasing transparency and accountability from investors, downstream customers, and consumers. But we've already seen that companies that have a strong ESG focus, including many of our members, all of our members, they have been among the quickest to react and adapt to these rapidly changing circumstances. And this adaptation has set them up well as they transition into return to work and recovery phases. So we think that the COVID-19 crisis will heighten the attention to transparency and disclosure on environment, social, and governance factors. And mining will be judged on its response, particularly given the spotlight that's been placed on the mining sector in most jurisdictions now as being essential. So to me, this must also mean remaining responsible. And ICMM has recently strengthened and enhanced our membership requirements, putting in place a comprehensive environmental, social, and governance framework to support robust site-level validation and transparent disclosure of performance at site. So I'll pause there, but just to summarize, we certainly don't have the answers at ICMM on how to build resilience of the mining workforce, but I would start with at least these three, as I've highlighted. Firstly, harnessing the benefits of technology and new ways of working through open dialogue and a widespread reskilling program. Secondly, broadening our worker base, making mining diverse and inclusive, and bringing young people into the industry in those jurisdictions where there is a real challenge of an aging workforce. And thirdly, strengthening performance across the sector through mining responsibly. And we all have a part to play in fostering that attention. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nikki. I know this was a very difficult question. I think nobody has the answers, but I think it's very important to hear how the industry is at least thinking through that, because that's, we won't have time to go around and ask, governments and everybody how they're thinking, but I think this is really important to at least get a gist of what the thinking is from the industry's perspective. There's no answer, I know. I'll turn to you for some thoughts now from the ILO. The ILO has been leading the agenda for a decent future of work. The data that you've published, notably on the number of people at risk from unemployment and from losing their livelihoods, are staggering. So from your perspective, what advice would you give to governments so that while they address the immediate concern, they do not lose sight of the longer term imperative of ensuring decent working conditions in the mining sector?
Thank you very much, Isabel. And firstly, let me greet the participants. Good morning, good evening. Good afternoon. Greetings from Geneva, where it is afternoon at the moment. Let me first thank the IGF for your kind invitation to the ILO to talk about actions government can take and industry can take to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on employment. And of course, all of this without losing sight of the future of work in mining, with all the livelihoods it represents also. Many of the speakers, the two previous speakers, already spoke about their actions, their measures that they have taken to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. And I'm very happy to hear that many of the measures, and also in the introductions of the previous two speakers, the world of work and the safety of workers is central. The world of work is facing a global health crisis, as we have already heard, and this is unlike what the ILO, with its 100-year history, has ever witnessed. COVID-19 has spread human suffering and damaged the global economy at a tremendous rate. The lives of many, many people are disrupted. In the past few months, and I believe that Isabel already referred to it, we have been monitoring the situation on employment, COVID-19 and its impact on employment. And our estimate now is that 305 million full-time jobs have already been lost. and counting. This is, there will be a new COVID-19 monitor, as we call it, and we are in a couple of weeks, and we are curious to see what the developments are. Also, around 436 million enterprises in the hardest hit sectors worldwide are currently facing high risks of serious disruption. This is not just in the mining sector, but also in other sectors, particularly the tourism sector and the travel sector, but also others. The impact of COVID-19 differs from sector to sector. The most vulnerable in the labor market, which are the informal economy workers and youth and women, they are significantly impacted by lockdown measures, and they are often working in these hardest hit sectors. The ILO has developed a 4-pillar framework to support governments, employers and workers, our tripartite constituents, in their efforts to address the impact of the pandemic. And the first of these 4 pillars is protect workers in the workplace. So this is at the micro level, where governments must support urgent actions to protect workers in the workplace. As we know, mining has been considered an essential service in many countries, and also in many countries it has never stopped operating. But there's also news reports from Canada, the US, Poland, South Africa, that COVID-19 has spread in some mining operations and communities. So our first concern is to keep workers safe, especially in such close quarters as underground mines. We never miss an opportunity to call on all governments around the world, particularly ILO member states, all of our 187 member states, to ratify the ILO Safety and Health in Mines Convention. This is number 176, and to ensure that clear guidelines are put in place and adhered to by the industry. We have just created a checklist to help prevent and control COVID-19 in mining, which I hope governments, mineral councils, mine management, workers and their representatives will use to stay safe, healthy and strong. Isabel, I believe that you mentioned that you could disseminate some documents afterwards, and we are happy to provide you with a digital copy, of course, of these guidelines, but also of ILO Convention 176. It would be great if you could send this to all participants in this webinar. The next level of that 4-pillar framework is support for enterprises, jobs and incomes. This involves, very importantly, extending social protection to workers that have been laid off, as well as helping enterprises survive and maintain levels of employment. In some countries, mining workers have counted on the support of the government, as we have heard previous speakers mention, and also companies to guarantee pay during periods of lockdown, avoiding unemployment and long-term poverty. But there are also reports of workers in the mining supply chain and in mining communities that have lost their income and livelihoods. The 3rd level is to stimulate the economy and employment and build back better. I've heard the 2 previous speakers also refer to long-lasting impact of COVID-19 with the aim to actually continue to build towards a sustainable mining sector. And this is what we in the UN call build back better. We need to use this opportunity. We need to start thinking about ways to build more resilient and efficient economies that are competitive, sustainable and just. Mining can play a major role in supporting resource-rich countries to overcome this crisis and contribute to their development. Governments can support the industry through special fiscal and monetary policies and by focusing on health protection measures and economic support to stimulate both demand and supply. And the last pillar of this 4 pillars framework is relying on social dialogue between governments, employers and workers to find solutions. And this is in the ILO's genetic structure, if you want. Social dialogue is of the utmost critical importance, particularly in times of crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic. Building confidence through trust and dialogue is crucial in making policy measures effective. This includes leveraging social dialogue to fine-tune policy packages so that they best serve those most in need. It was encouraging to see joint statements issued by mining employers and workers in some countries immediately from the outset of the pandemic. We need more social dialogue to get us through it and to a new and better normal. COVID-19 has caused further disruptions to a sector that was already going through changes because of climate change, technological advances, democratic shifts, and globalization. These drivers and megatrends will continue to change the way production and work is organized in mining in the future and could have an impact on employment and decent work as well. We know the climate is changing and there are global efforts to reduce strain on the environment. That means we must rethink the way we mine. We also know that we live longer and grow older, thus creating greater demand for natural resources. And we certainly know that we live in uncertain times. That's the only thing we know for sure, that we live in uncertain times with the return of geopolitics and a backlash against free trade and globalization. We know that technology means that some jobs will be lost, as we heard Nikki mention, others change and new ones will be created. And this is no different for the mining industry. The mining sector has been dealing with these challenges and is advancing into a new normal that might be more automated and maybe less labor intensive. But if consideration is given to how these changes can occur, through structured and consistent social dialogue, and thought is put into the skilling, upskilling and reskilling of workers and the necessary social protection systems, these transitions can be managed. We know the future of work is how we shape it. The future of work we want, we call that in ILO. So let's make sure that its guiding principle is human-centered, placing people and their work at the center of economic and social policies and business practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alet, for this forward-looking frameworks and especially for putting forward those potential mechanisms and framework the government can use when they're designing their future policies, building on the experience of COVID-19. And as you say, this is probably not the last, unfortunately, kind of situation, uncertain situation we're seeing. And thanks a lot for this. We have about 15 minutes left for a few questions. I can see we've got a few questions already there from the speakers. I'll turn to you, Gabriel, first with a question that I think we didn't touch upon the small scale mining sector. We really focused on large scale, but there is a question there from somebody asking whether any of those, any policies that have been put in place by governments have been elaborated also for the small scale mining sector. Is there anything you want to share with us, Gabriel, from your perspective?
Yeah, Isabel, there's something I wanted to say. The small scale mining sector is a real challenger for us. First of all, it's a long-lasting, almost cultural activity that has been performed in Brazil since its early days. And very often, small-scale mining activities create little cities, and these little communities lack almost everything that is essential for a reasonable, good life, from basic sanitation to electricity, and some of the workers there have to work 24/7. We have noticing that the small-scale miners in Brazil are eager for state support, and we have to remember that here in Brazil, for every small-scale miner, that is directly working in drilling. There is about 10 people that depend on the business. So it represents about 1.5, maybe 2 million people that rely on the activity to make a living. So most of these little cities are created spontaneously, almost spontaneously, without any structure or infrastructure whatsoever. So from our point of view, it's not just about, when we talk about small-scale mining, it's not just about mining or technical problems. It's about social, land, sanitary, and educational problem. So, as I said, we are working in a broad and interdisciplinary programs with the social areas, with the health ministry, and other entities that have some kind of interest in that subject. So that's it. There's a lot of things to talk about, especially what we are working on. But that's the summary of the subject and how we are dealing with it right now in Brazil.
Thanks a lot. Nikki, there's a follow-up question for you on the opportunities for digitization that you mentioned that can really help secure mines and ensure, at least strengthen the safety for people. And also looking at the other side, so more machines or more mechanization means lesser people, less people at the mine face. So the question is, how do you reconcile those two? Because you also mentioned in one of your points that you're looking at broadening the scale of number of people to work in the mine. So how does that play out? How do you look at the transition for those people who will be durably losing their jobs? What are the kind of mechanisms that the industry is thinking to prevent any backlash?
Thank you, Isabel. As Alette noted, digitization is changing the world of work across industries and around the world. But the impacts are particularly stark for mining companies and mining communities. And what came through clearly from our engagement around the world with industry, government, and communities over the last 2 years is that reskilling programs at scale will be central to mitigating the negative impacts and taking advantage of the opportunities from digitization, automation, and new ways of working. And it's going to require a partnership approach. This isn't something that the mining industry will or can or should do on its own. It's about bringing together different industries, government, civil society at global, national, and local levels to identify new models and approaches that stimulate economic activity. And imagine the new industries and enterprises of the future, and support the building of skills that will help people, mining community members and mining workers, participate in that economy. It's a challenge that has been brought into really sharp focus by COVID-19, and it's one that we will have to talk together and work together to find our way through, to trial and pilot new models of partnership, of identifying what skills are needed now and into the future for mining and non-mining roles, to identify the best ways of building those skills, so training people, getting those skills into the hands, heads, and the daily lives of the workers and community members, and then share the insights and learning across different geographies and jurisdictions so we can all move together faster. It is a huge challenge. It is one that has been brought forward and to the fore by COVID-19. But the other side of digitization and the automated way of working is quite possibly for mining communities. It may open up a whole new world of opportunities that were not there before. I'm now collaborating and working with people all over the world and being provided with services through the information superhighway, the internet that I've not used or accessed before, but now am through virtual working. There are opportunities that are available. The scale is hugely challenging, and mining will need to work with and learn from other industries as they pioneer approaches, but really play a really important role at a place-based local level in trying to work with and bring together and support initiatives that will help identify what skills are needed, and then help catalyze the delivery of those skills at scale.
Thank you very much. I have maybe time for one last question as a follow-up to Alette. There's one person mentioning that the proactive, the mining, the checklist is very much welcomed, and that it is proactive and attempts to prescribe what is necessary to be done to save lives and preserve livelihoods. But it might not necessarily work in many countries because there's lack of synergy across agencies and institutions in some countries. So how can ILO support those countries to carry out those sustainability, transparency, and responsible mining using those checklists in places where there might not necessarily be coordination across agencies?
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you for that, that question also. May I, before I try to formulate a response, first say something about the small scale, the situation of small scale mining. As I mentioned earlier, it is particularly those in the informal economy that suffer most. They are not protected, there's no social protection, there's very poor enforcement of legislation, they are outside labor law often and outside inspection. And also they do not have a voice in decision making on issues that really regards them. So the plight of those in the informal economy are very much our concern at the moment. They are the hardest hit, and we need to see how we can provide support, particularly to those in the informal economy. And we count small scale miners very much among them. Now, to go back to the question about what can the UN and the ILO do to ensure that measures are effectively carried out, and this is to enhance sustainability, transparency, and responsible mining. What we have done, and I'm very pleased to see that you have projected the COVID-19 checklist that I referred to earlier on the screen now. What we do when we build those checklists is we consult at the global level with the workers and employers, and also with some governments. And then once we have agreed that this is the way forward, that this checklist is effective and can support efforts of tripartite constituents at the national level, we disseminate. And this is of course not binding guidance, this is voluntary guidance for use by mining companies, by workers' organizations, by workers themselves, by governments. And what we do is we disseminate this among our membership. There's unfortunately not in our communication strategies that we use, we cannot enforce the use of these guidelines and checklists. But what we do is we have a wide network of country offices. They've all been provided with the checklist. We have our website, of course, and we can only hope that our website is visited and that this list is widely disseminated among those that need it. Suggestions are welcome. If you have any suggestions on how we can better and more effectively disseminate these products, we would welcome them. And also if you have further inputs on them that we all can learn from, that's even more appreciated as well. So effective dissemination of these guidelines and then providing support to member states, to workers and employers organizations, to mining companies, that is the best way forward. We have an excellent relationship with ICMM, and we hope to continue that, and perhaps we can actually even further develop guidance and the work that we do together, including on the checklist on them. So I'm happy to hear that you consider these useful, because that is the intention. We service the constituents, and we hope that that they are being used to the fullest extent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Maybe I should also say that IGF provides a platform for conversations among members, government members. So you're also very much welcome to join us in our meetings, etc. We can facilitate some of those for members to share best practices, also to explain to them how that works. Hopefully that can help the uptake. So don't hesitate to come back to IGF, you know, when we have our meetings, and we can also facilitate some of those conversations along the checklist. This is also something that we can do together. I think it's a very good way forward and summary on my part, because I think the conversation has been very rich. Unfortunately, we have only 75 minutes for the conversation. We could go on forever. I would like really to thank you very much to the speakers for your insights, for your prompt responses to the questions, for being here with us. We can continue that conversation in other forums. We do regularly talk to ILO, to the ICMM, and of course, IGF is government member driven, so countries, we engage our countries all the time. So thanks a lot for your participation. We will, as mentioned, also thank you for everybody who joined the call. We will be posting the records of the webinar in the next 2 days, and then we will be sending a thank you note to everybody who registered with the papers, the checklist, and any other useful documents that the speakers can share with us. We'll share that with you. So thanks a lot, and stay tuned, because IGF will be having a few more webinars. There'll be one notably on force majeure, and another one on downstream value addition in the mining sector. And then maybe in a couple of weeks from now, we'll have a very interesting conversation based a little bit, I think it will be an interesting follow-up to the conversation we were having now on automation and new technologies, more than like automation, new technologies, and how does that look like in a post-COVID world. So once again, thanks a lot, and hope to see you soon online for another webinar. Thank you very much.